Jim, lovely to see you as always.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, I've been thinking about I've been thinking a lot about incrementality. And I, we did this poll on LinkedIn last week where uh overwhelmingly the majority of folks, small sample size, but the majority of folks are saying we want to hear more about incrementality. And I was actually chatting about it with with some of my friends about sort of like real life measurement. It's sort of like, I don't know, the time that I was hypothesizing about building the measurement protocol around a coffee machine at my old workplace, just to be super nerdy and and be ridiculous.
Did
Yeah.
you really hypothesize that? Because we did that, and so did Love's
You
Data.
actually built it?
Yeah,
That's
at
so cool.
Lunametrics. Yeah. So,
Oh man,
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
I mean, I think
interrupted.
yeah, no. I think basically the cold brew was always running out, and
Yeah.
so I was just like, we got to be able to predict this. Anyway, that could be a whole thing on its own. But no. So I was thinking about incrementality, and I started chatting with some of my friends, and we thought about this application of real world measurement and this idea of, um, are you able to, what is the incrementality of having a job as it pertains to advancing your career?
Of course, you'd have to know the counterfactual for that. So,
yes, sure.
I mean,
well, yeah, exactly. And so we decided, well, who's going to draw the short straw here? And so we went around, and I drew that short straw. And so I quit my job. That's right.
This is my face of surprise.
And while the sit up here sounds like a joke, and it is, I actually did quit my job. So I actually, we talked on our end of year review about my journey so far with Ignite, and I have nothing but good things to say about the team over there, and I certainly appreciate all my time that I've had with that group. But what I've sort of had this introspective moment is, I am a data guy. I'm not the data guy. And what I mean by that is, I love the whole world of digital marketing. And I think that's actually going to make this podcast even better and even more exciting, because I'm going to be joining Tenuity. So it's a really exciting time. I'm joining Tenuity as their EVP of growth and innovation, starting in early March. And yeah, I'm super excited to again straddle that role between the digital marketing theory and strategy and data. So I guess the career advancement of quitting your job right now, I'm showing, hey, you quit your job, find a new one, and we're making tracks. But yeah, incrementality. It's such an interesting topic.
The incrementality of quitting your job and going to a new company. Yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well,
but
we're going to have to let
incrementality's hot.
We're going to have to let this test play out for maybe a couple of years before we get results.
Yes,
but,
it's a sample of one.
It is a sample size. So the degrees of freedom for that are, but when we were talking about sample sizes and testing and incrementality, this is an area where I feel it gets a lot of people talking about it and knowing that they have to do it. But the details can be really tricky.
Absolutely.
So we're lucky today, Simon, to be joined by someone who is going to fill in these details for us.
Brilliant.
Nick Stoltz is the Chief Strategy Officer at Measured, an incrementality testing and media optimization platform that's been around since 3 BC. That's before COVID. 3 BC translates to 2017. He has a bachelor's degree in physics, a PhD in materials engineering, and an MBA. This guy is educated, man. He knows all the angles, the business angles, the hard science angles. And he's been in the marketing analytics space for the past 15 years, including about almost half of that time at Market Share, which was acquired by Neustar, a familiar name in the MMM and analytics space. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thank you for having me. I can honestly say I've been a listener of the podcast even before the Simon days. I'm an OG in that sense.
Absolutely.
And,
BS.
That's right.
Before Simon, yeah.
The show is complete
I was calling
BS.
you out. I'm like, you never listened to the show. Don't lie.
Yeah. And actually met Simon when he was at W Promote at a conference at their offices in the pre-pandemic days. And Jim, really nice to be meeting you as well. So thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, the main theme for our episode today is all around incrementality testing. But before we dive right into that, listeners to the show will know I always like to start off with getting a little bit of background from our guest, how they got into what they're doing now, and a little bit about how you got to where you are now and some of the work that you're doing at Measured.
All right. So yeah, you brought it up. You call it very educated. Maybe my spouse calls it a Peter Pan complex, but I was in college for, I think, 11 years or something like that. It was quite a run. So 20 years ago, I believe it or not, I was building, I was a semiconductor engineer making quantum lasers that worked at something like 200 degrees below zero. Incredibly interesting work, but I wanted to get out of the lab. And I thought that maybe business school would be a good way to kind of transition into the business side of semiconductors. And that was a really great plan. I went into school in 2007, and then the financial collapse happened.
Ooh, brilliant.
As you can imagine, semiconductor startups were not exactly hot commodities in those days. So I took a marketing analytics class at UCLA with a wonderful man who recently passed away named Andrew Ainsley. And as everyone is scrambling in 2008, and nobody has a job and nobody knows what they're going to do, he said, I'm working with this marketing analytics startup that was also co-founded by a UCLA professor. Why don't I introduce you? And he introduced me to a mentor by the name of Yvonne Markman. And he got me on the phone and he said, well, do you know marketing? I said, well, I took some classes in business school. He's like, do you know math? I'm like, I definitely know math. And that is how my illustrious career in marketing analytics started. I was with Market Share for 7 years, which brought me to New York to help open up that office from Southern California. Actually met my spouse, we have 2 beautiful children. I met her at Market Share. Left Market Share, which was then Neustar in 2016, really trying to kind of get my head around and think about the space. I really knew in my heart of hearts, because I deployed more multi-touch attribution than anybody, except, people that were really there in the beginning. Like, this is not going to work. And it's not working now, and it's not going to work much longer. And I think only the people that are doing it actually know that. I spent a lot of time consulting in the space with folks like Analytic Partners and Econometrics and a company called Blackwood 7, and really kind of settled on this thesis that, between MTA going downhill quickly and, MMM is great and mature technology and a great approach, but also has these kind of correlation causality issues. I really felt cohort level in-market experimentation was the thing that was missing from the stack and the experiment stack. I'd even had a chance to work with a couple companies like Uber in my Market Share days that were out front here. And I was surveying the space. I couldn't really find anybody who was doing it. And the aforementioned Yvonne Markman introduced me to Trevor Testfleet at Measured. And I joined when we were probably 9 or 10 people and only had a handful of clients and less than $1 million in revenue. And 5 years later, actually, I celebrated my 5th year anniversary a couple of weeks ago.
Hey,
it has been a heck of a ride, and I am very excited about the space and want to talk some incrementality.
Yeah. And then this is, when you think about like MTA, like you were mentioning, it's kind of like you saw it like 5 years out, and you're like, I don't know that I want to put all my eggs in that basket. It feels like on the testing and MMM side that if I try to project 5 years out or 10 years out, it's like, yeah, it's going to just continue to be going up. It's like the rising tide is lifting all boats at this time. But
it's funny when the rest of the market kind of comes around to where you've been standing all along. You're kind of like, hey, I'm over here.
Yeah.
And I've been over here in some way, shape, or form since 2016. But look, a pandemic and an iOS and the cookie apocalypse, like, it'll bring people over to this place, right? I mean, the market reality is why people are landing here.
Well, I think there are those pushing factors, but I also think there are pulling factors, and I do think that Measured in particular has been one of the biggest pulling factors in sort of, you can poo-poo attribution all day, and you can have that. Well, now what? And I think when you come to the table with, like, there is a way to do it, there are solutions, and they're not going to be super labor intensive in all these pieces. I think that is really critical to that, and so. Maybe what would be helpful, just as we talk about Measured, for folks who maybe they've heard the name, they're not quite exactly sure what does Measured do, what makes it different. Could you give us a little blurb on, like, why is Measured unique in the space?
Yeah, I mean, look, we were doing incrementality before it was popular, right? I mean, we were one of the first really getting out there and pushing for this. And specifically, when we say incrementality, we mean, like, are you pushing out in-market experiments? Are you using that to train your marketing effectiveness models, no matter what you're using? And are you testing consistently, regularly? Are you using that to drive business value? And look, we'll get into it. Testing's hard. At this point, I think we've run something like 25,000 of these. believe me, we have taken a few lumps and we've screwed up a few tests, and like, that's a historical knowledge base and a learning curve that is really tough for internal teams to get up, for some of the new entrants in the space and things like that. I think we'll probably get into it over the course of the pod, but experience is really important for this stuff, right? It's true for building models, it's true for mixed modeling, but experiments, like, look, you're putting real treatments out there in market and watching what happens, and doesn't always go as planned, but even tests that come back and look different than you expected, I think can be opportunities. So look, that's where we're coming from. I mean, we are in the marketing effectiveness landscape. We offer attribution and mixed modeling and all the sort of stuff that you see out there everywhere else, but we are testing forward. We are driving value with testing. We are constantly experimenting, call it always be experimenting, ABE. And we're using that to train, calibrate, and drive, standard marketing attribution and marketing effectiveness. We're also doing that to explore strategic testing opportunities for brands because, look, a model can't prove a negative. If I have a new strategy I want to test out and I have no historical database model, it's not going to help me much, right? And that's another great opportunity. So yeah, all things incrementality.
There are so many places, like I could have like taken us off on like at least a dozen tangents during that. And I'm trying to hold myself back because we're in the beginning of the conversation and we want to like give listeners and viewers the context here. And I know, like you said, you've been in this just at Measured, for the past 5 years, and you've kind of seen, going back to market share, you've kind of seen the evolution of how things have played out. How do you see the landscape evolving? Or, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this already as far as like MTA kind of going out of fashion, testing, incrementality, conversion lift studies, all of the million different names they go by, that plus MMM kind of coming back into it. Is that it? Is there more to it than that? Or do you see other sort of things playing out in that evolution?
Yeah, I think, look, history is instructive here, right? If you don't remember it, you're kind of bound to repeat it. And, Simon, you probably remember this. I mean, the three of us on this call probably built a ton of models. I know about probably 1,000 mixed models, 1,000 multi-touch attribution models. Like, how were those models doing, in April 2020, 2 weeks into a COVID lockdown, right? Like,
yeah. They actually predicted it perfectly. It was amazing. It was an amazing time.
We trained
it
on,
we knew this would happen.
We trained it on the Spanish flu of 1912. And
yeah, exactly.
Models could do that.
I knew the data set would come in handy.
Models could do that Nick. In the stock market game, right?
Yeah.
Look, I'll even date myself. Like, I'll tell you what happened to my models for financial services in the collapse in 2008 and 2009, right? Like, models are good, but they look at an average effect over months, usually years, right? They tend to not adapt. And look, I'm using very extreme examples there, but those sorts of changes in the marketplace, right? They happen all the time. New marketing strategy, new product launch, changing competitive dynamics. Hey, I've got a new marketing channel I've never used before. Or, Facebook and Google are releasing these AI products that don't look like anything we've done before, right? Models don't deal with that well. Right? Models are great. They do a lot of things very well. But if they don't have a lot of historical data, they're not going to be able to react to that. Right? And so, that's where we found, and this is great. Like, we were working with a couple companies, Johnny Was and Faraday come to mind. And we're a couple weeks into lockdown and we're doing these sorts of tests and everybody's pulling back. And we start to pretty quickly realize with these tests, like, no, your ads are on fire. Like, push in. And I think a lot of D2C companies eventually realize that. But, look, those brands have become very big and quite successful. Look, I think that's a part of the story. They were testing when the models were telling them pull back, or basic financial strategy sense was saying pull back. That's really important, right? And iOS 14.5. Pretty similar instance, right? All of a sudden in June, after, months of nothing, your marketing effectiveness and Facebook Ads Manager went down by half. And so what did a lot of people do? They pulled their marketing spend down by half to right-size their numbers. Well, look, we got, 10, 20, 30 tests out pretty quick. And what we very clearly saw is that Facebook tracking is broken. Facebook ads are not broken. Your ads are just as good as they used to be. And if anything, all of the people pulling out has created a CPM deficit that you can step into and actually get a lot of cheap ads, right? So, this is where these kind of things really kind of bring to the forefront the value of testing and how it fits in the mix, right? So, and look, this stuff is, we're dealing with this today with shopping and PMAX and what do these things do, and, you think about the cookie apocalypse and all this changing landscape, right? So look, I think some of those things that have happened and have gone on, it kind of pushed people in the other direction. Okay, I'm going to have a mixed model. I'm going to have testing. I'm going to use site-side analytics or survey, post-purchase survey. They started kind of collecting all of these things, right? They can't all break at the same time. Now, that's a great idea. I'm actually a fan of it. The problem is marketers, at least for now, are humans, right? Humans are subject to something called confirmation bias. And if you have 5 or 6 signals and they're not agreeing, I think there's a natural bias towards picking the answer you like, or the answer that makes you look the best, or the answer that tells the story you want to tell to yourself or your bosses or anybody else. So I think marketers kind of, after zagging a little bit more towards like, look, I got to hedge my bets, I think they're coming back to a place. And again, this is where history comes full circle. How do I build something that looks like a unified measurement, right? And this is where you kind of get into, this is in 2014, and we're talking about connecting MMM and MTA. But I think given some of the advances in data science and machine learning and AI and all these sorts of things, where the market is going is like, how do I build kind of a model of models, right? How do I use these 5 or 6 different observations, these different signals? How are these signals into a single model that takes all of this stuff into account, right? I've got MMM and all the great stuff that it brings. I'm doing regular, incrementality testing to calibrate that and keep it agile. I'm leveraging the signal that I get from the ad platforms with post-click conversion and post-impression conversion, all those sorts of things. ID graph and user tracking, like all of these sorts of things can be kind of brought together. And I think that's where the marketing is starting to go. And that's why you're seeing incrementality plus MMM, but I think it's bigger than that. And I think that's what I'm tending to see the evolution look like in market.
There are so many avenues that we could take that as well. I feel like we've had like 12 possible tangents. Now I'm like, okay, this is actually maybe like 24 permutations. Sorry, just as you're speaking to that too, that is, I think, a great story for the very large, perhaps more sophisticated marketers. But there is that message out there of, you need to be doing incrementality testing. And so the ad platforms have come to the table with their own in-platform lift testing. Is that helping or hurting the utility? Because I don't know how many times I've seen it, more than I can count on one hand. Just a test is run, and then you get that email. It's like, by the way, you didn't have enough data. This is inconclusive. And that is just so souring to so many people. Like, incrementality doesn't work. I'm like, oh, why this one thing are you using to extrapolate to a whole concept? But I'd love your thoughts on that.
I mean, look, I think in platform, Facebook conversion lift is how a lot of people got their introduction to incrementality, whether they call it that or not, right? And look, an incredibly useful tool. 5 years ago, I was convincing people why they needed measured when they already had Facebook conversion lift, right? But look, it's been a difficult run and it's been privacy driven. 14.5 outright broke those on the walled gardens. Some of them have built that technology back up, but look, it requires a lot of technical setup. It can be very cumbersome and it's on you to kind of do it right. I think net of that and net of the continued, limitations around tracking and things like that, you need big volume there. When I talk to folks internally at the platforms, they'll generally kind of say, this is a definitely useful tool for like my Fortune 200, and look, the signal quality varies. Facebook's got a lot of great tech, but they're all subject to it. So look, I think it's a tool you can use, but look, those things are going to change and they're going to break. And if you don't have a way that you can own to be able to kind of deploy that type of testing, you could be left exposed the next time it breaks. And just given the signal noise and the quality there, look, I encourage folks to run a side-by-side. We'll often do a side-by-side conversion lift match market and give a thumbs up that look, if these are landing in the same place, then, you've got confidence you can use it and it'll give you good answers. And, look, you got a fallback option for other approaches, or in the event that it breaks, you're not wholly dependent on these things. So look, the answer is it's complicated. I think they're useful, but if that's your only outlet for incrementality, you could find yourself in a really tough spot the next time there's a market shock.
Yeah. So I know if I don't ask this question, I'm going to regret it. And probably someone else out there listening is having this question too. You mentioned running conversion lift study and geolift experiment or match market test side by side to kind of see.
Yep.
And one of the things that I've always talked to people about the benefits of an end platform test is that they can run the test at the user level. So sample size wise, right? They know who the users are because the users are logged in, right? So regardless of iOS 14.5 or privacy, this or that, like they still know that I am John Smith or I am Simon Polton or I am whoever. Even if you log off and log back in every time you open your app, that you're logged in as your user. So maybe talk a little bit about that and what are some of the other, because I know there are other issues around the conversion of studies from platforms. What are some of the things that are kind of that people don't know to watch out for or aren't really thinking about when they're looking at those in platform tests?
Yeah. Look, so yes, they can see those users, right? Now, the challenge is you've got to connect that to your order level transaction volume, right? You've got to make sure like, yes, that user, Facebook knows that user saw an ad. Do they know that person definitely converted who saw that ad, right? Now, look, there's a lot of ways to kind of set these sorts of things up, but look, there's just a signal challenge, right? It's not the same. You could actually go out and buy a user level prospecting list and you could mail all those folks a piece of mail. You could watch whether they buy on the back end. You don't have that level of control, right? You're kind of talking, you're speaking to Facebook through this sort of clean room, right? So you're kind of relying on them to be able to kind of randomly select users. You're also relying on them to kind of match back to the purchase signal that you give them. Like, look, there's just going to be some loss and some noise in that. I'd also say that, look, this is it's good to use the broader you're targeting, right? Because then it starts to look more and more like a randomized controlled trial, which look is very hard to replicate in the world of marketing. But if you start narrowing down and you're looking at lookalikes or retargeting audiences or, retention custom audiences that you've uploaded, you start getting down to kind of a narrower and non-randomized, population set. It's very easy to create bias in that, right? So like, I'll give the example of testing that you can do as a first party, right? Let's say you are a women's fashion brand and you've got a huge, customer list of people that have purchased from you. You can very carefully, you can randomly select 10% of those people and not mail them your catalog, see how well they convert. But guess what? Like there are a lot of different segments in there with different purchase affinity, with different, LTV metrics. Like that 10%, random off the top is actually hiding a lot of important detail. It's like, hey, if I take the average of 3 answers, I get something in the middle and it doesn't actually describe any one of my actual segments' behavior. That's where you can get in trouble, I think, on conversion lift because you don't know how that's being created, right? So again, if you can prove that you got good signal, you can, independently kind of validate that you get a good lift. I think it's good for very broad audience measurement, not narrow. I'd be very careful on narrow.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're, like you said, if you're a lookalike audience based on people who have been to your site, added to cart and got to the checkout page, but haven't purchased yet, and you're uploading.
And you don't know how Facebook's selecting those, right? You think but only their algo really knows, right? So that can get sticky.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even in that scenario, when we talk about iOS 14.5 and the sort of the effective ATT, it is one where they are going with more of that probabilistic scenario associated with off-platform interactions. And so that is where maybe you would perhaps skew heavier toward perhaps an Android audience, given the sort of, mass opt-out effect there. But I think there's a really interesting piece of this though, and for what it's worth, I also think that Facebook has invested a lot in their marketing science team, and they've done a lot of really interesting things with advanced analytics from you mentioned clean rooms, but from the specific clean room perspective. So I think there's some components there, but at the end of the day, there's always this you're letting the students grade their homework, and that is a very real fear. So what is the sort of what makes them measured different? Like what if it's not going to be at that level, what are you seeing as the replacement there? Is it geo-based match market?
Yeah. So look, I think it's important that marketers have a way to deploy tests that they can own, that they can control, right? And so typically speaking, look, it is nearly impossible to create a randomized controlled trial, right? Like you can argue that Facebook gets there if you're targeting a very broad audience, but doing it yourself is really tough. So what do you have? What are the ways that you can kind of deploy those tests? So there's a couple. I mean, match market geo-testing or match market testing is one of them. Now, look, that you got to be very careful, and it's hard to do those well because that is not a randomized audience, right? So if your agency's coming to you and saying, hey, like they're treating a match market test like a randomized control trial, like I call it Mason-Dixon line testing. Let's split the country in half. Like that's not sound. It is not randomized. So you have to be very careful about how you go about it. But look, it's extremely powerful because, if you're doing the data science right, there's great data science to build really powerful tests. Also, look, most of your marketing, most of your ad budget is very geo-targetable. Okay. So that is something that you can control. And if done well, I think it's a very highly effective, causal way to understand how your marketing is working. The second one I already kind of mentioned is testing on your house file, where you do have names, you do have purchase history. You see if that person purchases from you because, look, they put in their name and address and all these sorts of things that happen at purchase. You can deploy experiments where you carefully, build test and control audiences within those segments, and mail, don't mail, email, don't email, upload to a Facebook retention or YouTube retention program, don't. Those are typically the two types of tests that we're helping clients to deploy. And then, those are the ones that you can control, I would say, right? It doesn't leave you relying on an in-platform conversion lift from Facebook or your DSP or something.
So one of the things that I know both personally and with consulting with clients that gets people tripped up is the terminology. It's such a simple thing to get tripped up on, but it happens because we have a convergence of knowledge spaces here. We have statistics and mathematics, we have marketing and analytics, and they're all kind of converging on this area of marketing effectiveness. And so like statistics calls it a randomized controlled trial, and we call it a match market test. And like, I have, clients that have asked me like, what is the difference between these things? Or what is this and that? And I keep seeing all these terms. So I know it seems rather pedantic, but I want to just really quickly talk about like, what are the different terms and which ones are the same, which ones are meaningfully different. So like, we've already talked about geolift experiment, matched market test, same thing. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So there is a helpful way to kind of break this down because your point is very confusing. People confuse these things all the time. I think there are things I'll call foundational definitions, like what is incrementality? What is incrementality testing? There are methodologies. How do you deploy those things? And there are use cases. What business question are you setting them loose on? And those things get used interchangeably, which I think drives confusion,
Yes.
right? So foundations. What is incrementality? Because look, a lot of people say it these days. It's a very hot buzzword. And look, it's like that garage band and underground band you're listening to in college where everybody claims to have been to a show and all this sort of stuff. But like, look, most people are not doing it and they're not doing it right. Incrementality, like the next word out of your mouth better be testing. It better be an in-market experiment based on a test group and a control group, right? The control group is the business as usual. The test group you are carefully selecting and giving some sort of treatment, and you're measuring the difference between those two things. Okay, that's incrementality, right? So if you're doing a mixed model and introducing some geo variation, like, look, that's a cool way to try to increase the fidelity on your mixed model, but it's not incrementality testing. If you're looking through historical data and trying to find natural experiments based on geo variation, again, that's not an incrementality test. It can be a cool analytic technique, but it's
quasi experiment or pseudo experiment.
Yeah, exactly.
These terms are just everywhere. And yeah.
So look, a discrete and independent, I've designed a test and control, and I'm using that to do an analysis answer for this question. That's kind of the foundational stuff. The next is methodology, right? It's like, how am I creating the test and the control, right? So we mentioned the randomized control trial, and look, everybody probably hears about this because this is the process by which we bring drugs to market,
yes,
right?
The gold standard. I've said that many times.
Exactly, right? And like, that's the best way to do it because, and that's obviously why they do that for very important things like, drug health and stuff like that. Look, the reality is very hard to create those as a marketer, right? I mean, we talked about the closest you can probably get as Facebook's conversion lift, but as a marketer, creating those on your own, it's near impossible, right? Even if you were to go out and buy a list of prospect names and then experiment on that list, you're getting closer. That's a really expensive way to do it. And guess what? People are probably selling you a list based on, people they think that are inclined to buy your product, right? So, that leaves you with, match market testing, right? And this is not randomized controlled trial. Geos are not random, but you can look at how geographies behave historically and how easily or well you can predict those using other geographies. And you can build out pretty sophisticated data science models to both select, test, and control markets, as well as to kind of predict a counterfactual that you can use to analyze the test. Okay. And that is why the technique, I think, has become pretty powerful and pretty often used. And why, also why people often confuse it with, randomized testing or A/B split testing or things like that. So, that, like I said, this is where you get into the methodology. How am I creating the test and control? Geo is a very powerful tool that marketers can own and can operate themselves that they can use to answer some of these, business questions. And then the last is kind of like the use case. And this is where you also hear a lot of terms. Now, this is where I kind of like to go back to my engineering days and just bear with me. We can nerd out a little bit. I like to use
this is the place. This is the place to nerd out. So
yeah. So a marketer should put on their hat. They should embrace their inner nerd and they should try to hold themselves to a hypothesis framework. I believe that my Facebook prospecting ads contribute meaningfully to my business and deliver a $100 cost per order. That is a testable hypothesis. I'm going to hold out. I'm going to remove treatment from my test group. I am going to see what I should see, which is an expected drop in sales. I lost 10% of my orders within that test group based on my spend. Here's that efficiency. That's how we answer the question. That's a holdout test is actually just, look, it's against that hypothesis that we said. Hey, I think that TikTok has meaningful upside and the $2 ROAS I see today will hold up if I increase spend by 50, 60, 70, 80%. Great. Testable hypothesis. That's a scale test. Let's go in. Let's pick, if we're using match market, let's pick some controlled geos. Let's really turn up the spend on TikTok. Let's see what we should see is a bump in sales, right? To support that hypothesis, right? So if you're, rather getting into terminology of holdout, scale, new channel testing, stuff like that, bring it back. What's the basic business question that you're trying to answer? And then how would an expert data scientist come to you and say, okay, I can design a test around that. And that's, if you use that framework, that's where you can get into some of the really cool, not just validating your marketing and calibrating your models, which is table stakes yesterday, but really kind of starting to answer strategic business questions that start to kind of test out, different strategies, versions of the world that haven't exist, things that a model can't give you insight into that could be game changers for your business.
Yeah, no, it is a real challenge for I guess for folks trying to get into that. And as we're talking through this, I'm like, yeah, it's like going back to your bio 101 class you probably had in high school and remembering remember the scientific method? We all learned it. We all ran experiments. This inside. If most folks know this. If you don't, though, there's a ton of resources out there to teach you about some of these basic statistics concepts rather than sort of maybe just guessing what that gap is and saying, oh, well, this is going to be a test. But I do still think that, you can have all that rigor, but then a lot of folks run into this challenge of, you go talk to your boss about it and your boss goes, all right, well, let's try it. It sounds a little bit risky because we've got these numbers we got to hit and they're like, how long are you going to run this for? 2 weeks? And you go, yeah, maybe a little longer. I don't know. And then, 2 months later, you're sitting there going, I think we have to keep running the test. How do you figure out though, how much should you be, how big should your holdout group be? How much should you be maybe spending incrementally, in addition, or how long should the test be going? These are the critical things that I think I like the last mile, hurdle for folks.
Yeah. So this is really important, right? Because you need to understand what is the potential business impact of a test. If I'm holding out, I'm going to lose sales. Mm-hmm. If I am scaling in, I'm going to get sales. But if I'm scaling in, I got to come up with budget, right? And it's funny, actually on the ground, marketers are much more sensitive to and seem to have a harder time coming up with extra budget to run tests than they worry about losing sales on the business risk side.
Interesting.
Even though numbers wise. They're probably about the same risk wise. That's where their head goes. But this is where methodology matters. Okay. It just does. When you do Mason-Dixon line testing and you draw a line through the country, number one, you're testing on half the country. Like that's a lot of business risk or a lot of scale spend, no matter how you slice it. Right. So number two, look, I can tell you, and I can tell you this because that's where we started with, pre-post and more randomized, like it will give you the wrong answer or a meaningfully different answer a good amount of the time. There is no way with that kind of test setup to come up with a statistical confidence or a band around, the understanding of the answer. So look, the methodology matters. You need to select and build a model, frankly, whereby you figure out which geos you have that you can very easily explain by what is going on at the same time period in other geos, right? Now, now this is not a mixed model, right? A mixed model tries to predict based on a bunch of independent factors. These things, hey, I'm looking at sales in New York and I'm using it to predict sales in, Washington, right? Now, look, you build up a basket of tests and basket of control and you select the states whereby you get the best model fit. It's called an AA, right? So if somebody can't give you an AA prediction fit and say, look, over the last 2 years on a weekly basis, I can predict sales within 1.1% based on the model I'm generating, then they're basically treating this like a randomized controlled trial and it should be a big watch out for you. Okay. If you build those really effectively, we typically test on 8 to 10% of the country, which means you're minimizing business risk. It also means you can probably run 2 or 3 or 4 tests at the same time if you really want to kind of like hit the gas pedal on learnings. And then that same model that you use to select the markets and to fine tune the fit, you actually use that to build a prediction. It's the counterfactual, right? So if I've turned off Google brand search in this basket of 10 markets, my model is predicting what I should see. And I know the error around that because I've seen it historically. I'm observing a lower number because guess what? Those brand search ads that I'm providing in other markets aren't there. Okay. That's how we essentially build the how much sales have gone away. And it's also the thing that allows us to provide statistical confidence, rigor, things like that. Now, before the test, you simulate that 100,000 times. That's how we can tell, hey, you want to drive statistical significance. You're going to hold out this percent of the country. You're going to run the test for this long. And, look, in 99% of our simulations, that gets us there. And then the same models are used during the test to say, okay, hey, we're now at a 97% confidence level after 4 weeks. It's good to shut it down. Or, hey, we're at 70% confidence level. We think another week or two will meaningfully drive that up. Let's check back in a week. So that's where methodology and the data science is really powerful. And I think, look, a lot of the testing I see that brands are doing, with agencies or with other vendors, like, look, it doesn't hold up to that rigor.
Yeah. And this is an area, I know there's a lot of ongoing research in this whole area of causal inference that we're talking about, right? And so there's, for those open source fans out there, there are packages like, 3 packages. There's dynamic time warping, there's causal impact, and then there's one that wraps them both up into a single one called market matching or matching market. I forget the order. All 3 of them are packages, and I think there's some Python libraries equivalences as well that do like the helping you determine which DMAs or which states are good candidates to be in a control in a test, and then also, like you're saying, say, okay, here's you could even go simpler, right? You could go do a different diff. There's a lot of different ways of trying to get to the causality answer, and I guess that's one of the things.
Be careful. Just one quick thing. Be careful of diff on diff, and one way to look at that: change your time period for the diff and look at how the answer changes. Like we were doing that in the early days, and it became very difficult to kind of say, well, if I pick this 30-day period for the diff on diff versus this one, I might get a different answer. As part of the big reason we moved to a counterfactual prediction.
Yeah.
I don't want to derail us, but what is diff on diff?
Difference of differences.
Yes. Okay. So, that makes sense. It's all coming back to me now.
The simplest way to design these is, like I said, let's split the country in half. Let's hold out in this half. How did this do 30 days on 30 days? How did this half do versus this half? Look, I think 30 to 40% of the time you'll get a meaningfully different answer.
Interesting. Yeah. So like one of the things you said early on, and I wrote it down because it was, I'm going to make a t-shirt. So this is going to be in our store.
We're going to have a Measure Up
And
store
it's
of
going to be
funny
a t-shirt
analytics
that just
quips.
says testing is hard. I feel like that pretty much sums up like the feeling of a lot of people out there, is that it's not just the math and the statistics, which is hard enough in and of itself, but it's also, hey, you need to know a little bit about marketing, because we can't just create our control group and our test, our control DMAs and our test DMAs, and then we turn off the ads and the test DMAs and see what happens. Like, we have to monitor, because if we shut off ads, then the way that Facebook or Google shifts the way that it spends its budget, because everything's PMAX now, or everything's becoming automated. We can't just say, okay, we shut it off in the half group, now let's wait 4 weeks and come back. Like, we have to monitor those, make sure that the spend between groups is relative to what it was before, or making sure that the test is still valid, right? So maybe
this is an extremely good point. We actually talk to like pretty enterprise high-end data science teams. Like, I think, brands spend $10 million on their data science team, and they nail the data science. And they come to us and they say, look, all of the operational lift to traffic these campaigns, to monitor these campaigns, to generate the reports after the fact, we can only run 4 a year. Like, we've heard you do 50 a year with some of your clients, because look, we saw early on, the more you can test, the more value you're going to drive, right? That's just the way this works. Tests build on tests. They feed a learning agenda. Like, this is a multi-year kind of strategic build, right? That's how it should be working to drive value all the time. If you're running 4 tests a year, it's going to be limited. And it's because, like, look, are data scientists trafficking the campaigns? Is your agency?
Yeah.
Trafficking's probably fine. Who's monitoring this stuff? And you mentioned PMAX and ASC. Turn off branded or non-branded search on your Google test in a match market and see what PMAX does. Are you looking at that? Like, I've done a couple hundred PMAX tests, and I know it's really important. You have to actually build API monitoring to make sure that, hey, we're spending to scale. Other things aren't bleeding into the test. These are things that you can't account for and correct, but you have to know they're going on. Most people don't.
And these are the things that trick people up, right? These are the things that all of the articles you see on LinkedIn about everyone should be testing incrementality, they never talk about these details about, like, oh, you got to monitor it. I mean, real quick story. We had
1,000 hours, right? Yeah. I mean, like, I can honestly say I've taken my lumps on these because we've run into these problems and had to figure it out or retest or do that. It's impossible for, newer vendors in the space or your data science team or things like that to catch up to the 20,000 of these we've already run. And the product that we've built to kind of enable, like, hey, we're going to API traffic campaigns, we're going to API monitor, we're going to generate the reads automatically. Like, it's really powerful. Everybody goes to the data science, but I think the practicality of running these things at scale, that's where enterprise marketers are landing. It's like, oh, we can do the data science. Like, doing this at scale is a beast.
Yeah, they'll just, I've gone to the media team and said, hey, we need to create a test and control group. The control group has these 32 DMAs, and the test group has these 32 DMAs. I need to create new campaigns for this test with these DMAs, and they just start groaning, and they don't like me when I do that. So, like, being able to do this programmatically through an API, which the APIs already exist. So of course we should be doing this the easy way, not by going and manually creating campaigns and adding the DMAs and all that stuff. So yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. And look, this stuff is critical, right? Like, if you've got a model, and look, this is the dirty secret of everybody's model, right? And you guys know it because you've done a lot of mixed modeling and things like that, but these things all move together. Okay. And there are literally thousands of versions of a model that give you the same statistically viable fit. Mm-hmm. So how are you making the choice between what version of the model you're using? Well, guess what? Someone on your data science team or someone on your vendor's data science team is making those decisions. Now, look, hopefully they're doing it based on many years of building models across the industry, things like that. Look, most of the time, and I've seen this stuff, I've been a part of it. It's like, well, I think I'm going to spend a lot of time consulting with a client, try to get a sense for what they think the answer should be. And then I'm going to kind of push my models in that direction, right? It's, look, I love diminishing returns curves as much as the next guy, but like, look at the data points on your curve, and I'll tell you how effective mixed models are at projecting diminishing returns out into areas you've never spent before, right? Are you going to let's optimize a budget based on moving, increasing spend 70% here beyond completely outside of historical ranges, And let's assume the model's drawn that curve correctly. Because if I draw it like this, or I draw it like that, higher, slightly lower, it's a very different answer. If you need to build observations that drive those models and kind of take it out of, look, a data scientist kind of making a decision or pulling a lever, or frankly, your own bias getting into a model. Because bias, it's the, model building is more art than science these days, right? I mean, back in the market share days, we were building one of the first kind of scalable Bayesian platforms, all this stuff. Look, people didn't have access to that. Now there's great open source code for model building. It's really about what decisions are you actually making with the model? What answer are you landing? How are you arriving there? Which is another, I think, killer use case for all this testing. We work with Google. They kind of came to us after seeing one of our webinars. They're like, you've run in the last year since we released it, you've run 200 PMAX tests. Can you tell us what you're seeing? Can you tell us what kind of campaign settings tend to do better or worse? Because, they rolled that out and some marketers went all in on it. Some kind of deployed it as a new ad product, within their mix. Nobody really knows what it's doing. They don't show you inventory. So, look, that kind of experience, you can use that to train models, right? I can walk in on day one and kind of say, hey, brands your size that spend this much, that have your AOV and consideration cycle. Here's the typical result that we see from a Facebook prospecting test. Now, look, does that perfectly describe your brand? No. Do I want to run a test and get the answer for your brand? Absolutely. Is that a better Bayesian prior setting from day one than what your modeler thinks the answer should be? 100%, right? So, tests you can even think about it within your brand, tests build knowledge. The bigger testing database you have, the more it drives your learning agenda, the more it's powerful for you to understand what's going on out there. And we're doing that across 150 clients. It's really a really powerful database of what's going on out there.
Yeah.
Man,
Simon, I think
feel like we could be going on for hours.
Yes.
Frankly, no, seriously, there's so much here.
We're gonna have to
I
take
think we're
this.
gonna need to run this back. I think we'll have to do another one of these, maybe with someone else from Measured. We'll figure that out in the next few weeks. But this has been so interesting. Sorry, Jim, you go.
Yeah, I was gonna say we need to start going like Andrew Huberman or Lex Friedman with the 4 or 5 hour long podcast to really dig into these topics. But there's a small handful of us that would probably listen to that. So
maybe one day.
So as we do wrap up here, one thing that we like to leave our viewers and listeners with is an incremental insight, something that they can go and read right now, or they can go do, or they can take into action. And so, Nick, do you have an incremental insight to share with our audience?
Yeah, and there's a lot of great content that we have on the Measured website that our marketing team puts out, and thought leaders. So I really encourage you to check that out. But I actually selected something. It's an HBR article from a few years back that really hits on the meatier pieces of this. And look, a lot of this is change management. It's data science, operations. It's how do you build a culture of experimentation? And this article is short, but it's extremely powerful. It talks about the power of, how do I build an experiment learning agenda? How do I match that up with my strategy? How do I test the big meaty questions that could really kind of change my business, right? I'm going to introduce upper funnel marketing. What is the, omni-channel impact across retail and stores? All of these more advanced use cases that our adopted brands are kind of getting into. It really talks about building that culture is a change management exercise, and getting people to adopt that mindset, but also not just decision on the results and decision on the confidence, not on what you thought heading into it. I find that to be really powerful. And there's some compelling data about brands that can kind of get to that place and put experimentation behind that agenda, tend to see, it's compounding interest on the returns to your business and the overperformance against your peers. I think it's one of the few, marketing science, organizational competitive advantages that you can still build out there, that doesn't require, Fortune 100 type dollars, right? So I see brands using this as a competitive advantage every day. That article really kind of sums up the softer points, and not just hey, what's the quality of your counterfactual model?
Absolutely. And just as we're, thinking about, we talked about a lot today. There's a lot of people talking about doing a lot of tests, having an experimental culture. There's not a lot of folks who are actually doing it. So there's, I think, less talking, more doing. And look, when the reality is you haven't run a incrementality test for the past year, but you tell everyone you've got a experimental culture, then I think it's time to measure up.